to today's GPS webinar, Secrets to Becoming a Successful PhD Researcher. And what we're going to talk about today is just kind of techniques, characteristics, traits, and attributes that PhD researchers are expected to have, and some tips as well that might help you along the way. But I'm sure a lot of this will be self-explanatory. It will be just probably already known to so many of you, but I think it might just put into words some of the things that you've been thinking about already with regard to your own doctoral studies and your PhD journey. So let's begin. So as I said, I spoke already about the PGR survey, so I'll just go through that and remind you again at the end about that. Okay, so just with regard to the secrets of becoming a successful PhD researcher. The first one I would say is to select your topic early and pick a research topic you love. And I think this is, something which has been reinforced again and again. Just the importance of that, to pick something that you're passionate about. In the past week or so, we've been doing some podcasts with postgraduate researchers at the University of Limerick, and what comes through with everybody on those podcasts is just how passionate they are and how much they love their topic and love their research. And that is fantastic, because not everybody loves their topic, but it's so important to be able to pick something that you're passionate about. And I hope that you've all done that. But if not, there are ways that you can mitigate, if you like, that situation. Okay, and obviously, as I spoke about last week in the webinar on supervisors, the importance of choosing a supervisor with a good research record in the field. And something which, again, I think is important for supervisors to do, and maybe I didn't reinforce this last week, is just, one of the supervisor's roles is obviously, to help you develop your research, but, a really good supervisor helps you in terms of developing the researcher also. So you could say there's that two-pronged role, to develop the research and to develop the researcher. But I would say it's just so important to have a supervisor with a good research record in your field, and that would make your PhD journey, I would say, more navigable and more manageable. Become familiar. Again, a lot of this came up last week in managing your supervisor. The importance of becoming familiar with your supervisor's research and their methodological expertise. I think that helps you then to just in terms of being aware, perhaps, of your supervisor's modus operandi, how your supervisor works. And I think that will give you, really, really valuable insights, and will into, how your supervisor operates, what kind of, methodological approach that they take, what kind of research they've done, and so all of those things are, I think, just, they're not critical, but I think they're, I think they're important. What's good also, particularly, when we're in an era when a pathway to academia is not as smooth as what it used to be, and when so many people now with PhDs are going into non-academic positions, it's also good to have, a career development plan that you outline in consultation with your supervisor. I should stipulate, of course, that many of you will go into academic careers, and people who do choose to go into academic careers, many of them end up in that said field. But it's good, even at that, to have a career development plan in consultation with your supervisor if your aim is to end up in the academic arena. And again, just reiterating what was said last week, to have realistic expectations of your supervisor and arrange a schedule for meetings. And, I mentioned also last week about having an agenda, how that's a really good thing to have, when you go to meet your supervisor, to have an agenda of what you might speak about, because that should lead to more productive meetings. And it's always good then to send a note back to the supervisor just to say, can I just clarify that we discussed this, this and this, you know, in the meeting, and you want me to do this. So it's always good, you know, to have a schedule, to have an agenda, and to keep notes, and to keep the supervisor's feedback as well. We talked last week in the breakout rooms about the importance of feedback, and it's something which is, you know, really critical in how you develop your thesis. Okay, now we'll be going to the breakout rooms after this presentation, so I'm going to go along relatively quickly through the rest of these slides, and we'll have a chance then to discuss what you think, as you know, are the attributes and traits and necessary types of plans that people should have to become a successful PhD researcher, or indeed what you do yourself to become the PhD researcher that you are. Okay, so yes, so again, this is what we had last week: to schedule meetings, identify the amount of time needed and the purpose of draft an agenda, and send it to your supervisor in advance, and summarize an action plan at the end of the meeting, and follow up with a brief summary of key decisions. So all of those things we talked about last week, and I won't reiterate them here again, but you'll be able to see these in the notes that you get and the slides that you get after this webinar. Okay, and again, I'm sure all of you are fed up with me saying this, you know, how the importance of writing to the research question and trying to write to that question, you know, when you do write, you know. So and obviously it's important to try and write every day. Now that's not going to be possible, but you know, it's something to aim for. You know, and even if it's something that you've let slip, you know, to begin next week and say, this week I'm going to write every day, and you'll really see the benefit of that. You know, even if it's a draft, even if you think it's just terrible and execrable, it's still, you know, the art of writing is still a great habit to get into. So but writing to the research question, so you know, and as I said, it's a really good idea, you know, if you're working with your laptop, to take your research question and pin it or post it onto your laptop, you know, just take a note or whatever, like, and sellotape it onto your, stick it onto your laptop and have it there, and think, this is what I'm writing to, this is my research question, this is, you know, what I have to, this is what I have to answer. Because, you know, it can happen with a PhD that, you know, you can end up reading everything about your subject, or virtually everything about your subject, or everything you discover about your subject, and you know, you can digress and move away from the research question. And that's something which is so, you know, it's so liable to happen with so many people, and does happen, unfortunately, because the amount that we can read now, especially with the fact that, you know, when an article is published, it's you know, it's there, it's there immediately. You know, it's not like the days when people, when they were looking for articles, had to get what was called an interlibrary loan, and they had to go and, you know, go to get a printout of an article, and it might be sent, say, from the library at Trinity College or something like that. But now, with electronic access to so many journal articles and so many sources, it's so easy to get distracted and to think, oh, one more article, if I just use this article here to in my PhD, it's going to make a difference. And I know, because I was like that at times. I thought, well, if I read this article, and if I this sounds like a fantastic article that I have to get, and it sounds like something which is going to be so important to my PhD, so I'll get this in, I'll read this, find this article, read it, and then I'd read the article, find it fascinating, find 10 sources within that article, and think, I need to read these 10 articles also. And then I'd find myself going off, reading those 10 articles, and probably writing very little as a result, and making no difference, a little or negligible difference to the actual, to the actual thesis itself. Very, very fascinating, really stimulating, fantastic to be able to, have the time to read those articles, and highly, highly enjoyable, as I say. But whether they made a difference to the PhD or not, I would say is if they made any difference at all, it was infinitesimal. So it's that's why I just think that advice, which I heard, after I'd finished my PhD, and I always thought, that's brilliant advice, just to write to the question and try and direct your writing to that question, and not get diverted from it, because, well, everybody does get diverted from it, but try not to get too diverted from writing to the question. Okay, and again, this is another piece of advice, which it's great advice, but it's hard advice to adhere to, but you'll find that the people who do adhere to this, who treat their PhD as a job, almost like that you have a structure to your day, in which you try to segment your day and say, okay, in the morning I'm going to write, I'm going to read in the afternoon, and then bring it all together and do a little more writing before I conclude. It's amazing, how the people who do treat their PhD as a job are really successful in terms of completion and in terms of the time in which they complete. But again, I think it's great advice, but it's not always that easy to adhere to. Again, because you can just find there are so many distractions, or it's not always straightforward to be always able to devote your time to your PhD. I know so many of you would have other duties like tutorial hours or laboratory work, or work on committees, or you would preparing for so many other aspects of your research, or you might be attending courses and classes, or because of financial pressures, many of you, I'm sure, are working also, be it part-time, probably less so these days, but I know in what we used to call normality, that so many of you would be working in order to pay for your or to supplement your PhD. So it's not that easy or that straightforward to treat your PhD as a job, but you'll find that those who do, those who who structure their time, set goals, will keep advancing, and tend to be the people who finish in the kind of optimum amount of time. So it's something to keep in mind, and even if you haven't been doing that so far, it's never too late to start with something like this, about treating your PhD as a job. And it's, as I say, it's the optimum use of your time. And you'll be amazed, when we hear of, great writers, like great writers of fiction, for example, it's amazing how their actual days, their working days, are pretty, they are pretty solitary and pretty, one would say, confined, and very extremely disciplined. You hear again and again of these great writers, Roddy Doyle, who, be it Dermot Bulger, Tobin, about how disciplined they are in terms of, basically being nailed to their desk for hours on end. So Anne Enright, people like that, you listen to them and think, wow, they have a solitary existence. And it's their imaginations that are fertile and conjure up all these amazing characters and incredible storylines. So, but for them, it's a solitary, relatively solitary existence. Now, I don't mean you should have a solitary existence. That's not what, but that if you treat your PhD as a job and structure your time in a way that allows you, to do the writing and get the reading done, you'll find that hopefully you'll be more productive as a result. I'm sure many of you are already incredibly productive, but it's just a piece of advice. And again, a piece of advice which and it should be said that it's a piece of advice that if you go to any seminar about tips on how to do a PhD, everybody will tell you, to treat your PhD as a job. But if you ask the person giving the seminar, did they treat their PhD as a job? You'll find in many instances the answer is no. So, but this is basically, kind of advice, as a way of avoiding, the myriad distractions that are there. Okay. Another thing that's very useful to know is just about, the research culture of your faculty and your department, and to become socialized to that, and to become more, I suppose, more you'll find that really successful PhD researchers are people who are, very aware of the research culture and the kinds of research being done within their faculties and within their departments, and becoming socialized to that. And you'll find that the more aware you are of that research that's going on, the more you'll be inspired to write and to become, a member of that of that research community. And it's also important just to build and maintain professional relationships with members of your faculty, with your fellow postgraduate researchers, and indeed, if possible, with recent graduates also, as well as, the really, important and vital relationships and friendships that you have with your other PhD colleagues and other students. So it's important, though, to have these kind of professional relationships and to become socialized into the research culture of your faculty. And what's also good is for opportunities to co-author with your supervisor and with your faculty colleagues. And when I talked earlier about becoming familiar with your supervisor and with their methodological approach and with their research, that's where it can be really, one of the advantages of that is, it provides you with the opportunity to maybe, co-author with your supervisor at some stage. And I realize many of you, depending on the discipline, I realize many of you will be co-authors and will be on papers. Your supervisor will be on your paper. Particularly for those of you who are doing article-based PhDs. But it's always good to look for an opportunity, though, to co-author and to write papers with your supervisors and with your faculty colleagues. And you'll find, by working with them, by working with people who are really productive in terms of their research, that's a great kind of boost and a great catalyst for you to be productive in your in your research also. And it's fantastic anyway to write, to have a paper and to have publications while you're writing your PhD. Persistence, yes, it's perhaps one of the most, one could say, again, this very much depends on who you listen to, but so many people will tell you that persistence and tenacity are the most important attributes of a successful PhD researcher, because everybody doing a PhD, it's taken for granted about everybody that everybody is smart, that everybody's has a degree, certain degree of intelligence, etc. But the attribute that most differentiates PhD researchers who get to the finish from those who, but the attribute which differentiates those who finish from those who don't is persistence, persistence and tenacity. So these are essential, really, when it comes to your PhD, because there are days when you'll be very demoralized. There are days when you feel like giving up. That there are days when you'll hate your PhD almost invariably. Hopefully that's not the case for all of you, but I know for quite a substantial number of you that will be the case. So persistence and just having the tenacity to get back and to drive on again with your research. That's absolutely vital. And it's something which again and again is whatever whatever book you read about, doing a PhD, this will be stated, just the importance of tenacity and never giving up. Now, I saw a quote from somebody recently. Excuse me. I saw a quote from someone who said that a PhD is 10% intelligence and 90% persistence, but I don't actually agree with that, because I don't know how you can actually I don't know how you can actually come up with data for that. Anyway, but what you can take from that, though, is that persistence is perhaps the most important quality you'll have as a PhD researcher. Only because, as I say, you're doing a project which is enormous, which demands a great deal of you, which demands a great deal of emotional energy from you as well. So that's why, just to keep going is absolutely crucial. And to get back those days when the experiments don't work, those days when the piece of writing that you submit to your supervisor is somewhat returned with a lot of critical comments and you're very demoralized, those days when you feel like you can't write, that you've got writer's block. It's just that persistence is something that is absolutely vital. And I realize it's easy to say that, but you'll find that persistence, tenacity are invaluable attributes to have. And you'll find there are people who come onto a PhD and I've heard people say afterwards that they never realized the levels of persistence that they had, the levels of tenacity. People who said, I thought this PhD would break me, and almost broke me at times, but I didn't realize the kind of reservoir and the depths of persistence that I had within myself. And they were very, very kind of proud of themselves at the fact that they managed to complete their PhD and get over the line eventually. So, it's also important to have, intrinsic motivation. That's essential. Intellectual curiosity, obviously, and persistence. But yeah, persistence is, is huge. Also, just to say that, as a PhD researcher, you have a huge amount of flexibility when it comes to your time. So it's obviously important to develop, good habits and try and adhere to them. So, I'd say try and avoid distractions or displacement activities. Because there are just so many of them. It's so easy to become sucked into these kind of activities, which will, demand your time and demand your energy. But they're displacement activities. But you'll find so many people doing a PhD engage in displacement activities, just want to not think about their PhD for a while. I know myself, when I was doing my PhD, I was offered a post lecturing in another institution. It was like a part-time post, and I took that position, and I found I gave the best lectures I ever did. I prepared meticulously for those lectures. I read prodigiously, and but it was all the time a distraction and a displacement activity from my PhD. And the areas in which I was lecturing really had little to do with my actual PhD itself. But I found it fascinating and invigorating, and it was a great for me. It was a hugely enjoyable experience. Incredibly incredibly intellectually stimulating, but it was a displacement activity ultimately from my PhD, and my PhD suffered that year as a result of taking that part-time post. But it was almost a way of distracting myself from the PhD. So you can find that you get sucked into activities that become displacement activities and huge distractions, and the way, I suppose, it's just important to have, techniques and strategies to help yourself to get out of those, because it's so easy, as I say, to get drawn into those kind of activities. And obviously, we talked before about setting priorities, goal setting, time management, problem solving, networking. All of those things, are are attributes which you'll develop as you go along with your PhD. And obviously, you become a better problem solver, and you'll, networking, I think that's taken as a given. It's probably very difficult in these times, to network, but it's something that, you should develop and evolve as you go along. And your supervisor is vital here as well in helping you to connect with people in your field. Okay, this is a quote from Marlena Cohen of the University of Nebraska, who said, "Those who do not succeed in graduate school do not fail, they just do not persist." Now, again, there's a lot of data out there, and I don't know how reliable the data is, because I have some degree of skepticism about how universities return this. But I saw again a quote recently, and I think this is more anecdotal than empirical, but it said that 65% of PhD, of people who begin a PhD complete, and 35% don't, or just don't persist. Now, I don't know how true that is, but and I've looked for data on it to find out what the actual dropout rate is from PhDs, but it's difficult data to gauge. But that's one source I had, but I'm not sure about the reliability of the data there. But it did say 65% complete and 35% fail. And then of those who do complete, the actual failure rate of those who do complete is absolutely negligible. Like, it's something like 0.1 or 0.2%. So if you get to the finish of your PhD, there's a very good chance, statistically at least, that you're going to be successful. And that's why persistence is so important. Okay. And again, a lot of these will be so self-explanatory to you about master the literature, how it can lead, to future collaboration opportunities, but write as well as read, just how important it is. As I say, you can find today, because of the proliferation of literature that's there in your area, you could read forever, but that's why it's important to write as well as read, but to master the literature, so and again, that issue of future collaboration opportunities, those can arise. And it's great when somebody comes up to you at a conference and asks you, would you like to write a paper together on some area, or somebody, that you've contacted about an issue wants to write with you and engage in collaborative writing. Okay, and then obviously, again, self-explanatory, to keep up to date with new approaches, statistical methods, if that's your area, and evolving areas in your field. And if you're relying on statistical methods. So all of those things are so vital, new approaches, statistical methods, and areas as they develop, because you'll find it's really good to be up to date with the literature. And I think I said also, before in the Surviving the Viva webinar a few weeks back, how good it is when you can have a situation where, even after you submit, I think the advice there was, even after you submit the PhD, just to be aware, to look at what literature is in the field since you submitted. So it's just always good to be up to date with the literature, because you might find some really, important papers and see any kind of breakthroughs in your field. But as I say, try not to become sucked in to reading every single thing about your area, as tempting as that may be, because your writing then may suffer as a result. And obviously, to develop a plan for multiple publications. I think we talked a bit about that in the getting published throughout your PhD, consult with your supervisor or with members of the faculty where you're based, and your peers and your fellow PhD students about publication opportunities, and to discuss these, discuss the possibility of publication of your dissertation with the examiners, and particularly with the external examiner. And you'll find, quite a number of you will find that when you do your viva, that your PhD examiner, particularly your external examiner, will discuss with you, the possibility of having your thesis published, and that's great. And again, something which I've emphasized a lot is about finding your own voice as a scholar. This is something which comes up a lot with examiners of PhD thesis, is when they say that the scholar just didn't find their own voice, that they were relying a lot on the literature that's there. They just didn't have the confidence to make that kind of transformative breakthrough, they say it's a brilliant thesis in so many ways, but we need to hear more from the scholar about their own. We need to hear more of their own voice rather than letting other authors, speak for them. So that's something which, again, you'll develop your confidence as you go along throughout your PhD, and become more confident in your area and in your topic. So that's, again, an essential attribute of a PhD scholar, is having your own voice. We can talk about that later if you want more clarification on what that actually means. Okay, and again, attend important conferences and network. Very difficult in the midst of a pandemic, and, well, effectively impossible, except there is the safeguard or the contingency of online conferences. But again, networking is trickier as a result. But I know myself, I'm part of various networks and various, online groups, and we've never met, but but we know each other, and now we get to the point where we're able to, have a bit of a laugh with each other when we begin our discussions, and have a bit of informal talk. And that's one of the things which is missing a lot with regard to the pandemic, about how, so many of our meetings now are relational rather than, and don't have any informality to them. So but it's important, that you try, as you may be sick of attending events and attending workshops and seminars online, but it's important also, just not to lose track of the important conferences that are in your field. And so many conferences now have gone online. A year ago, I think the notion of an online conference would have been just anathema. It would have been just terrible to most people. But now it's become, people have learned to do it in a much more skilled way, even than would have been the case just 12 months ago. So you can find some really, really well organized and really well put together conferences, and these are opportunities also to network, but obviously not networking as we know it, or as networking as relatively easy as it used to be. So it's, I think, if you're in the first year of your PhD, try to attend a research conference if that's possible. It's always a good idea to do so. It'll really help you in terms of building confidence and and networking. But again, trying to attend one online, but try to attend one online, and there are opportunities there, and there are research conferences in your area. I would say also to, just again, this is self-explanatory for you, to attend speciality, area, conferences that are specific to your niche area, and so subject specific conferences. And when we do get back to something, to approaching normality, hopefully, when you are able to attend conferences, it's important that you introduce yourself as the experts at the conference, and even to have questions in advance that you can ask them. That's always a good idea, because some people, they find that they want to speak to an expert, but they're almost intimidated and can't get the words out. initially. So it's always a good idea in advance to have a couple of questions ready for any experts. Again, this is much trickier online, but it's still possible. Okay, and use every opportunity to seek funding, and obviously, look for constructive criticism on the funding applications that you make. Um, uh, something which I think again is good advice is that a resubmission is the easiest funding application you will ever write. So even if your application for funding is turned down, you'll find that if a similar opportunity arises elsewhere, you have something effectively written for that and to be directed to that funding opportunity. So and you can take the feedback from the initial funding rejection on board when making the resubmission. So and it's always good to have funding, particularly if you're thinking about an academic career, because you'll find, and especially if you're, if you're thinking about an academic career, for example, in the UK, funding, the emphasis on funding, on the ability of researchers to garner and create funding is enormous. So if you can, if you can show that you have sought and acquired funding, that's a really, really important facet and character. That's a really important trait to have, for you as an academic scholar. Okay. Excuse me. And just remember that, in terms of your thesis, that a lot of the time, and again, this won't be the same for all of you, but, a lot of the time, what you're doing is you're writing a convincing narrative. So that's why I say that research is a rhetorical skill. It's not simply about, process, but it's about, skill with the language as well. And one of the great skills in writing, is developing a coherent and convincing narrative. So your PhD, ideally, but obviously there's not good, should have an important story to tell. And you should, no matter what the discipline, I would say, one of the things that you should do in your PhD is be able to convince your examiners of why this research is so important, and show in your thesis also your passion for the subject, no matter how kind of arcane or how kind of how kind of obscure your research may appear to be. There is always a way of writing a convincing narrative in your research, and displaying that passion and just the why you think this research is so important. And also, that your PhD, it is a social process, and getting the word out about your PhD to others is a great skill to have also. So communicating your research to a non-specialist, non-expert audience is hugely important. And I say it's hugely important here because a moment or two ago we talked about funding, and it's so vital when you're looking for funding that you're able to convey to the funding body that you can distill and articulate about your PhD subject in a way that a non-specialist audience can understand. And you'll find that again and again. For those of you who go, for example, for Irish Research Council funding, one of the things they ask you to do is to write what's called a lay abstract, as I remember. And that is where you write something so that it's impossible to what's called a lay person. I suppose they mean somebody outside of academia. So it's something that you write to a non-expert. So just, when you talk about your research, communicating your research, people aren't going to understand, the great majority of people might find your subject, the topic that you're talking about, very, very abstruse, or very, very kind of specialist. So it's just important that you're able to communicate that to a non-specialist audience as well, because you'll find that that is a great skill to have, because even when you're at conferences, even when you're networking, you'll find that there are people maybe who are not specialists in your particular niche area, and you need to be able to communicate that to them. So that's something that that's one of the kind of attributes of PhD researchers, is just being very good in terms of communication skills. So also just the other skills, as well as communication, it's important to identify skills you'd like to have for your future employment and try to enhance them. And obviously this would be dependent on the kinds of future employment that you're thinking about. So if you're thinking about employment outside of academia within industry, you have to think, well, what do I need for this particular position? Well, probably things like project management, things like innovation, entrepreneurship, leadership, all those things, communication, time management, etc. All of those things would be, really, really vital elements to have. And you can find out more about skills, or the kinds of skills that PhD graduates are expected to have, here in what's called the IUA. If you click on that when the slides go around, that will bring you into what's called the Irish Universities Association PhD Graduate Skills Statement, and that identifies, that's been redrafted at the moment, but that's the latest iteration of it up there, and that shows you the skills and attributes that you're expected to have as a PhD researcher. And it's always good to articulate your career goals. Think about your career goals and try to, as I say, articulate them, and try to engage in doctoral program activities which are consistent with your career trajectory. So if you're thinking about, a career in industry, and you see that there's a workshop about, innovation and entrepreneurship, you may then be very tempted to go for that. So it's always good to, go for activities and programs and seminars and workshops, which align with your own intended career path. These, again, this is just an example of some of the skills that you'd be, that PhD researchers are expected to have. And I don't know if you can see, here just you might see things like communication skills, analytical problem solving skills, interpersonal leadership skills, self-management, team management, information data management skills. All of those things, they are things that people acquire in many cases almost imperceptibly, almost without knowing it at times, that you become better at all of these particular skills as you go along. And again, I think it's just important that you're able to articulate those when it comes to, future employment, and to be able to say, well, I've really good data management skills, or project management skills, or self-management, self-governance skills, and, good skills with regard to innovation and communication, etc. So, and it is amazing how many people actually don't articulate the kinds of skills that they've learned as a PhD, or don't realize necessarily the kinds of skills and attributes that they have acquired throughout the time that they're doing their PhD. But these, as I say, are skills that you will acquire. Some people will acquire them obviously better than others, but it's integral to a PhD that you become better, that you become a better project manager, because what you're doing is you're working with a huge project, over an extended period of time, over a 4-year period of time, and sometimes it's longer than that. So that's a huge project to take on. So you have to learn about all various techniques with regard to project management, and different skills, with regard to doing a number of activities, virtually simultaneously, and having milestones and things like deliverables, and things like progression, and building in things like risk mitigation. You may not even, as I talk about those, they may not make too much sense to you, but there are things that you will do in your PhD, even without necessarily being aware that you are engaging in things like risk management, and risk mitigation. So all of those things are really, really good skills to have, and they're something which you do develop, and they're skills which evolve and which you hone and refine while you're as you go along on your PhD journey. Okay, and what obviously is what's really useful, I think, to your PhD as well, is what we call experiential learning, and that's whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience, so that's where, you're taking your where new knowledge, if you like, is being created, through, the through experience. So it's like, which is a fantastic way of, developing and learning. And it's become much more, if you like, there's a lot of focus these days, on experiential learning and how, important that is to not necessarily to PhD researchers, probably more to do with, people who are doing professional doctorates where they're making a contribution to practice. But this is a great way of learning, and it's really can be really, really vital in terms of helping you, understand, get a more profound understanding of your PhD. And you'll find for a lot of you who are involved in science and engineering will find that, experiential learning is integral to your PhD. Less so perhaps in some other disciplines and in some other areas, but so many of you will find that experiential learning is essential to helping you develop your research further. I would say here that it helps you understand that conducting research is highly challenging, exciting, and never perfect. You'll find that, experiments that you do go awry, and so much of science, for example, and so much of research is trial and error. And that's why, persistence, why I said there, persistence is so vital, because, when something goes awry and goes wrong, it can be so demoralizing. But that's why you have to, go again. And, that's why I said here, research it's never perfect, so, and experiential learning is, a great way of developing your research further, and obviously disseminating your research as widely as possible. We've talked about that a lot before, and again, I think, that's something that you're all aware of. Get help if you're struggling, get help, not just in terms of mental health, but just, say, if you're struggling, and you need some help with references, and you need library services, or you need, counseling services, or you need career services, or you need to call on us within GPS. If you're struggling with your supervisor, try and find somebody to speak to about this. There are ways and means if you are struggling with your PhD to get help, and it's no shame whatsoever, because you'll find that everyone needs help at some stage of a PhD, to varying degrees, but it's not something to be ashamed of at all if you do need help, to ask for it. And obviously knowing when to stop is a hugely underrated thing, an important thing also. And one of the most important things you'll do with regard to your PhD is knowing when to stop, because as I say, I think when I was coming to the end of my PhD, I would find an article and say, no, I have to get this art. As I said earlier, I would say, I have to get this article in there. This sounds too important to leave out. And this author has written this piece recently, and I think this could be really transformative and give us a different perspective on my, give a different perspective to my research. And then, as I said, I'd find 10 different sources from that. I'd read those 10 articles, find another 10 sources from each of those different papers, and find suddenly that I wanted to read 100 new articles. So, knowing when to stop is one of the most important things you'll find in your PhD. And I know myself that when I handed over my PhD, I was just, I was almost trembling at the thought of, oh my God, is this complete? Is this, and then I would think, no, I shouldn't hand this over because I have something else to write. And then I would go, oh, that article I didn't include, or that reference, or this author that, I omitted. And so you'll always find that it's never going to be perfect. But that is why handing over your PhD is just, it's one of the greatest things you'll do and one of the most satisfying things you'll do in so many ways, but you'll still hand it over and immediately have some kind of remorse and go, oh my God. And it's always good to just give yourself a break when you do hand over the PhD and not to look at it, not to look at the thesis immediately between handing it over for submission and getting ready for your viva. Because you'll find a typo or an error and think, oh my God, this is the end of the world. So just knowing when to stop is really, really vital.